Good day, welcome to Schindlers TV, and we're talking about renewable energy and carbon tax with Juan Sabio, an associate at the firm. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you, Gary.
Tell us a bit about renewable energy.
Gary, renewable energy is basically energy which is produced from renewable sources and which can be naturally replenished, so it never runs out.
Okay, the various sources of renewable energy. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yes, in South Africa we've got a few. The most important ones, the most common ones are solar energy, wind energy, and hydroelectricity, which obviously is implemented in dams.
Okay, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, those are two very important issues with regard to and in relation to renewable energy. Let's discuss a bit about them.
Absolutely, Gary. The Kyoto Protocol was basically developed from the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and this convention was established to address the problems of climate change. However, because it didn't have emission reduction targets, in other words, it didn't impose responsibilities on countries, they said we need another system which actually implements emission reduction targets. It gives responsibilities to countries, obligations, and that is why the Kyoto Protocol was established in 1997, was created.
Okay, is it correct to say that the Paris Agreement's been a bit of a flop? What's your opinion?
In my personal view, it's not strong enough. My understanding, my logic behind it is that in terms of the Kyoto Protocol, developed countries had the obligation to reduce their CO2 emissions. But in terms of the Paris Agreement, which was signed last year, end of last year, they now are saying to the countries, you impose your own emission reductions. You tell us what is good for you, and then you implement that. So there isn't a strong obligation on countries to actually go out of their way and reduce their emissions.
Let's move on to a buzzword that's going around, particularly with regard to environmental law and other related issues, is carbon tax. What exactly is carbon tax?
Carbon tax, Gary, is basically, now we're putting a price on carbon. As you know, CO2 emissions pollute the atmosphere. They go into the atmosphere and they pollute the environment. But now we're saying we need to deter people from using so much carbon. In other words, don't use petrol cars. Buy an electric car, buy a hybrid. The reason for that is that we reduce our CO2 emissions. And by putting a price on carbon, we are basically telling people, if you continue using carbon, you will end up paying tax on it, more tax as well.
Okay, is there currently any law with regard to carbon tax? There is a bill before Parliament, am I correct?
Yes, there is a bill at the moment, and this will become an act which will come into operation in 2017 from next year, and it will run up until 2020. From 2020 onwards, we're still to see what happens.
Do you think it's going to be effective, this legislation?
The hope is that it will be effective, but there are certain flaws which are obviously evident when looking at the bill and looking how they plan to implement it. The reason why I'm saying this is because it is very difficult to put a price on carbon on the industry at the moment, because if this carbon tax is going to come into operation, this will have huge financial repercussions for institutions, for corporations, because at the moment they're paying normal tax, which everybody does, but now they're going to be paying tax on carbon depending on what they produce in the industry.
Will the businesses be looking for loopholes, particularly in the law, to get away with not having to pay carbon tax, or at least pay a lot less, or find a way around this situation of carbon
Absolutely.
tax?
I mean, the bottom line is that you have to pay carbon tax. Just like you have to pay your normal tax, carbon tax obviously is legally enforceable, so should you not pay it, there'll be tax fraud implications, and that you can be criminally prosecuted. However, there are ways in which you can reduce your tax liability regarding carbon tax. So for instance, at the moment, carbon tax will go for 120 rands per ton of carbon in the atmosphere. So if you want to reduce that tax liability, then you can, for instance, enter into a forestry program where you say, I plan to plant a number of trees, and that project will give you credits. Those credits will reduce your tax liability. So there are ways in you can reduce your tax, but you still have to pay it.
Juan Sabio, it's been an
Gary,
absolute pleasure to have you on Schindlers TV.
Thank you.
That was Juan Sabio talking about renewable energy and carbon tax.